Superman, Wonder Woman, Black Panther, Batwoman. Who is your superhero? When I was a teenager, my number one guy was Spider-Man. But today, I have a new hero. His name is Vishavjit Singh, and he joins us long distance to talk about turbans, cartoons, and using one's superpowers for good. Vishavjit, welcome to Feel Like You Belong.
Thanks for having me, Alan.
Yeah, it's really great to see you. We talked earlier, and so to have you here in the studio, it's a real joy. The crew's been excited about your joining us as well. But I want to start off by talking about a little bit about your family's immigration story.
Sure. So I was born in the nation's capital. My parents are from India. They moved to Washington, D.C. in 1970. My dad was working for the Indian government, so he moved here, worked at the Indian embassy for a few years. I was born in the nation's capital, not far from the White House. There used to be a women's hospital, which was actually constructed first for Civil War and World War I widows and other women. So it has a pretty interesting history. And now it is not a hospital anymore. It's a condominium complex. So I lived in Washington, D.C., Maryland area for the first 4 years of my life. And then after that, I moved to India because my parents went back to India, spent part of my childhood there, came back. I came back after high school to Los Angeles. Then I moved up to Santa Barbara. Well, actually, I went to Ohio, came back to California, Santa Barbara, Berkeley. Then I moved to Connecticut, New York State, and finally I'm in New York. So I'm kind of like, like a lot of Americans, I get to move around a lot, and I've had quite a rich, interesting experience, both here in the US, East, West, Midwest, and a little bit of flavor from India also.
Sure. But now I'm guessing that the question you get way more often than you care to hear is, where are you from? And in fact, you took pains to say, I was born in the nation's capital.
Yes, so that's very true. I get asked that question all the time, and it's a I think a lot of us get asked that question, and there's nothing wrong with that question per se. So I tell people, look, I'm kind of from a lot of different places. I don't really have a place I call my hometown because I've moved around so much. And then some people, they accept that, but then some people are like, but no, where are you really from? As if they're not satisfied with the fact that, I'm from New York or Washington, D.C., where I was born. And so I know what they're trying to get to. They're like, wait a minute, somebody who looks like you cannot be from here. So I tell them, well, I am an first generation American. My parents are from India. And then they kind of feel like, okay, all right, now we feel comfortable. We know you're somehow not from here.
Got it. So are your parents back in India, or have they come back to the U.S.?
They have now. My dad finished his work, retired, and then subsequently I actually applied for my parents' immigration because I'm a citizen. So they're kind of like globetrotters. They spend a few months here in the U.S. They have a home in India. My mom's entire family actually is in Western Canada, in Vancouver. So she travels to Vancouver a little bit. So yeah, we're kind of like a globetrotting family. My wife's British, so her entire family is actually in the UK. So we kind of have like a global flavor.
Got it. And actually, there's a fairly large Sikh population in Canada, correct?
There is. Actually, percentage-wise, the Sikh population minority is much bigger in Canada. They're much, in the US, I think we only have about 500,000 to 1 million. In Canada, I think it's a much higher percentage, and they're very well represented, actually, even in the political sphere. They have a Sikh defense minister. They have 3 other cabinet ministers who happen to be Sikh, both men and women. So yeah, they have a much bigger, more integrated Sikh presence in Canada.
And I was delighted to learn a couple of years ago that you even have national Canadian hockey broadcast in Punjabi.
Yes, that is something that has been in the news in the US. I know the New York Times, my city's newspaper, has covered them. Yeah, they have a Punjabi broadcast that happens, and they have a pretty big following now in Canada.
Sure. Now, the typical immigrant parents, I think especially from India and other places around Asia, they have certain goals and objectives for their children's education and how they practice their professional lives. I'm guessing cartoonist and superhero was not #1 on your parents' list?
Oh, it was not even on the list. It was not on the list. It was basically two things I was told growing up: engineer or doctor. And unfortunately, I did go down that rabbit hole. So I was a pre-engineering major, pre-med major. I ended up not doing either. I actually ended up majoring in biology, and then I did go to grad school for public health. But I did kind of ended up going into software engineering on my own for many, many years before I segued out of it. And now I'm kind of a full-time cartoonist, writer, and performance art.
So when did you really decide that cartooning was something you had to do?
So it was really an accident. It was not something that I ever fathomed, never dreamed about. It unfortunately or fortunately, it comes out of a tragedy. When 9/11 happened, I was actually working and living very close to the city, just north of New York City. And so when that tragedy happened, I actually was at work. And within a few hours, I was feeling a lot of fellow Americans' anxiety and anger kind of getting projected onto me. So I knew my life's going to change, just like everybody else's, but my life was going to change a lot more than many other people's life here in the U.S. So I had to work from home for 2 weeks. I could not leave my house. It was that sort of not a safe space for somebody who looked like me to be out and about. And then when I did step out, it was a very difficult moment because everybody kind of looked at me, stared at me. People called me names. They told me to go back home. And what in among in the midst of this anxiety and fear and anger and grief, I spotted a few weeks after the attacks a cartoon by an editorial cartoonist, Mark Fury, who lives in the Bay Area, San Francisco. And he had created a cartoon capturing the predicament of a lot of people, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, anybody who was brown, who could pass for being the other at the time. And he also had a Sikh character. And that gave me the idea that, hey, somebody's using cartooning medium to capture my predicament and illustrating a character who looks like me. So that kind of gave me an idea. Maybe I should start telling my story using the medium of cartooning. So it took a few months before I started illustrating, but it was in the year 2002 that I sort of started seriously considering and then actually teaching myself how to do cartooning art to tell my story.
So growing up as a child, did you have any interest in drawing?
Very good question. Yes. So I was a doodler. I used to doodle as a young kid. I did do that. So I had that sort of proclivity to do cartooning, but that was like a side thing. But by the time I'm in 6th and 7th grade, my parents told me, okay, you need to stop doing art, period. Like, you cannot do this, focus on studies. And unfortunately, I listened to them, and I did not pick up the pen and pencil for drawing until after the attacks of 9/11.
Okay. Okay. So fast forward all these years, you do cartooning now. This is a major part of your world. Tell us about Sikh Tunes.
So the year 2002, when I finally said, okay, I want to do cartooning. I want to share my story. This is a medium I can use to perhaps connect with fellow Americans, both who have empathy for my what I'm going through, and also those who don't know who I am and they stereotype me. So I started cartooning in the year 2002. My website, sicktunes.com, was born. I wanted to have a home on the internet. And I think the internet, I want to emphasize here, without the internet, I would not exist. I would not be doing cartooning. It gave me this medium that I could reach out to people beyond New York and, globally. And yeah, so my inspiration basically came from my own experience as a turban and bearded Sikh American in the US, looking at news stories, and some were figments of my imagination. And yeah, I've been doing that since 2002, and it's, I've gotten better at drawing. I've gotten better at sort of capturing contradictions and representing them on paper with cartoons.
So we were talking about how 2001 changed the lives of really everyone in the United States, but especially for Arabs, for Muslims, for Sikhs, for South Indians. There was a shift in perception and who belongs and who doesn't. There was a second dramatic event in 2012 that affected your life and thousands of other people. Can you talk about Oak Creek?
Yeah, so 2012, Um, on the morning of August 5th, we had a white supremacist who walked into a Gurdwara in Milwaukee, a Sikh house of worship, on a Sunday morning, just before the morning services were going to start. He walks in with guns, and he didn't say a single word, and he started shooting, and he ended up killing six worshippers. And the police showed up pretty quickly. He engaged the police as well. He injured one of the police officers. And subsequently, he basically, he died in that shootout as well. But that hit me really hard. I mean, I remember that day even very clearly today that this could have been me. You know, this is somebody who walked in, and he doesn't know who these people are and didn't say anything, but just how we look and taking out his anger, frustration, whatever his prejudices and bias. So I actually ended up writing an op-ed piece, which was published in Seattle Times about, again, connecting my cartooning to it, saying we need a new comic superhero in America who's going to fight hate and intolerance. Pretty good villain to fight. And I made the case that that superhero should be either Sikh or Asian or Jewish or African American. And that there's a photographer friend of mine. At the time, we were not friends, but this is somebody who was trying to capture Sikhs through a photo essay, and she was trying to capture me as one of her subjects. So she reached out to me, saying, would you please reconsider? Because she had asked me a year ago, would I don up as Captain America because I created an illustration of Captain America in a turban and beard, and I said no to her because I have body image issues. I've been bullied as a kid, and post 9/11 people have, they've given me a lot of hard time. So I'm like, I don't want to wear a superhero's uniform, walk out, and get even more attention on me. So after this attack and this op-ed piece, I think I had to get out of my own way, and basically I said, sure, I'm not comfortable doing this, but I'll say yes to donning this uniform, and let's do the photo shoot. So yeah, a few months after that, in 2013, I ended up sort of walking out on the streets of New York dressed up as Captain America. And mind you, Alan, I've never dressed up for Halloween before this. I'm a very shy, introverted guy who I'm like, I don't want to stand out. I actually want to get lost in the crowd. So it was a very sort of strange experience, but again, a tragedy kind of forced me to get out of my own way and do something that I was not comfortable with.
Sure. And there's a lovely video of you walking the streets of New York and talking with people, interviewing people about who can be Captain America and can a Sikh be Captain America. What are some of the responses that stuck with you?
So it was when we first did this in June 2013 photo shoot in New York City, I was very, very nervous, fearful, because I didn't know how people were going to respond. And it turned out to be one of the most amazing days. The first day we were out for 8, 9 hours. I had strangers, hundreds of strangers, come in and hugging me, taking photos. Police officers in New York City came up to me and took photos with me, which never happens in civilian clothes. I got access to Fiona, the photographer, asked a fire department truck, which was managing a parade that day, which we did not plan on, can we have your truck? And they said yes, which is, that's a privilege, because you're not, you can't just get a fire truck at your disposal. But I did as Captain America. I got that truck for 20 minutes so I can jump in and out, pretend I was driving it. I got pulled into a wedding. That's the power of a fictional superhero's uniform, that once I donned it, people did start seeing me differently. So I have stepped out many more times for videos, comedy segments. Sometimes I go unannounced, uninvited, and almost always it has been very positive. So I'll give you an example. I went to the RNC convention in Cleveland in 2016, and I stood outside the convention center, just sort of people passing by in and out of the convention center, and it was amazing. I think sometimes I confuse people because they don't know how to place me. Like, why am I doing this? Who are you? Why is Captain America with a turban and beard? But what my intention here is, I want that confusion to lead to a conversation. And it has. I mean, I've received letters from serving members in the armed forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, veterans saying, hey, we've seen your photos, we've seen your video, love what you're doing. Your version of Captain America is my version of Captain America. I've made friends with police officers from Arizona who have seen my work. I mean, it has been, I have gotten to experience people and Americans in ways that I never would have been able to do if I did not don that uniform.
Sure. So two last questions before we wrap up. You have started doing public speaking now, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And how is that going?
So again, I think Captain America kind of opened the doors. A lot of schools initially started reaching out to me saying, "Hey, Vishwajit, would you come to our school and share your story? Why do you do cartooning and why do you dress up as Captain America and talk, tell your story?" And it started from there. And now, 3 years ago, I was an engineer, a software engineer
Right.
for 15 years, gave up my job, and I full time now travel across the U.S., go to schools, go to universities, companies, libraries, and I share my story. I use my cartoons and I share my story. I talk about things that people sometimes are comfortable or not comfortable about. So, race, identity, stereotyping, vulnerabilities, getting out of your own way, finding your strength and your superhero inside you. It's going really well. I mean, I have been received very warmly throughout, every, the South, the North, East, West, and my hope is, my plan is, I want to go to about all the 50 states. I've covered about 20 states right now, and 30 more to go.
Fantastic. So last question, are your parents now proud of you?
Well, they were always proud of me. I think there are moments where they were not sure what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I think initially when I wore the Captain America uniform, my parents didn't grow up reading comic books. And they were they were not sure why I'm doing what what's going on. But I think they've seen the response that I get from people, the love and affection, the support in large part. And I think for them, they realize, there is something they might not understand exactly, but they see that love and affection, those bridges that are being built. That does make them very proud.
Fantastic. We're going to have to leave it there, but it's been a lovely conversation, and we'll do all that we can to encourage the local universities here to bring you in, and in that case, we'll have a chance to say hello in person.
That'll be wonderful. People can find me easily on sicktunes.com, or they can Google Sikh Captain America, and that'll lead them to me.
Fantastic. Take care. Good talking with you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. If you're watching us on TV, stay tuned for our following segments on language and culture. If you're watching Feel Like You Belong on the internet, we hope you will share your feedback with us via our website and YouTube channel. Be sure to watch our many other stories about the inspiring superheroes who helped to make these United States a better place.